Uh, Hello, everybody. Ni washale bahi ni tawatae debanopa shumban. Hello, everybody. My name is Reyes Devore. I'm from the Pueblo of Jemez. I currently serve as the Community Programming Director for Pueblo Action Alliance. I am also a mother, also a part-time teacher at the Native American Community Academy here based in Albuquerque, so-called Albuquerque and Tiwa Territory. That's also where I'm checking in from you today also. And I've also been co-leading the Indigenous Impact Community Care Initiative with Seeding Sovereignty, which we'll definitely get more into later through this panel.
Oh, Tyler, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
You see, sometimes you get used to Zoom and then sometimes you just lose it all. But thank you. I just wanted to go ahead and get us started. Amber, do you mind, or Reyes, do you mind explaining to me or sharing with our audience what mutual aid is?
Yeah, so mutual aid is ensuring that you are providing the basic care needs and essential item needs to your community. It is coming together to respond to what those needs are from your community members and ensuring that you're going to provide that collective care to the people whenever there's a crisis that were to happen. So in this case, when the pandemic hit, there were many different mutual aid response teams that came together, not just on the community level, but on a tribal level, in order to provide that care from our communities. You know, it's when we think about mutual aid in terms of Indigenous people, this year with the pandemic, it's also bringing up, you know, autonomy and sovereignty and what that can actually look like for our communities in general.
Awesome. Thank you so much for giving us that brief introduction of what mutual aid is. And I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Zoe. So how did you get started in mutual aid work?
Hi, thank you for joining us. So I'm, it's kind of funny. I think my friend Kelly and I, it kind of started over a Facebook conversation. She had posted, you know, one of those, it's not really a chain letter, but like something that said like, don't be embarrassed if you need help, you know, any time of day, if you're hungry, you need something, yada, yada. She kind of posted that and I responded, and because knowing Kelly, she worked for the tribe, and I asked her, you know, does the tribe have a community pantry? And she said, no, we don't. And I don't think we have the capacity right now to get one started. But I have an idea. I have a trailer. She had this like traveling trailer, and she's like, it just needs some shelves, and we could load up some food and drive around and give it to elders. So we kind of laugh about it now, but like that was like our big idea. And so I'm like, well, you know, I volunteered my husband. I'm like, you can build shelves for us. And he did. And we were able to purchase items for our first care package distribution. We started out with like 25 care packages to elders. And for me, since I work in the school, our school had a program called the Backpack Kids, where on the weekends, we identified certain students and they would come, you know, to the main office on every Friday and load up their backpack with like snacks and breakfast items for the weekend. And so since the pandemic hit and our schools were closed and everybody was at home and virtually learning, I was worried about those kiddos. And so our first 25 care packages went to those kid families and also our elders. But we, at the same token, we decided to put together a personal fundraiser page. And I know Kelly, you know, she's really good about fundraising and big ideas. And so she was telling me to put the goal of like 5,000 or 10,000. And I was thinking like that's just a lot of money. Like I don't feel comfortable asking for that much money. So I said, how about 3? And we ended up hitting our 3,000 goal within like a couple hours. And by the end of the month, you know, we were up to 25,000. And finally, we ended up with like 55,000, I believe, on our first fundraiser. That was just off a personal fundraiser page. And in addition to that, we started getting support from other entities. And this was all just off of that Facebook chat that we had. And so it kind of just grew into this big thing. And we ended up, the trailer never left my house. Like we used it for storage, but we just got so much more donations and support than we could handle in that little trailer. So we ended up partnering with the Pueblo of Zuni and was able to utilize the Zuniwana Center gym as kind of a staging area to do all of our distributions out of that area. So that's basically how our partnership grew. Kelly and I were really not friends per se. We were more acquaintances and just bonding over the fact that we were feeling really helpless and 2 moms that just wanted to help our community. That's kind of how our participation originated from. And, you know, people like Reyes organization reaching out and saying, how can we help? This is what we have. We can support you. You know, she was one of many that just kind of reached out, and it just grew. And so lo and behold, we started doing mutual aid work. That's how we started.
That's awesome. And as you mentioned, Reyes, earlier, that you work with Pueblo Action Alliance. So I know that your work has been happening, mutual aid, before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, how did that change your efforts? What sparked your inspiration for continuing it on? And how did that look organizational wise?
Yeah, to start off right off the back, you know, when the pandemic hit, when things were shut down, I was also already working at the school, Native American Community Academy, and then also doing PAA work. And for a minute, we had to kind of take a pause, you know, to reflect on how we were going to approach these next steps. And we first actually started with ceremonial action, which is one of our principles of actions as our organization. And what that means is, you know, we wanted to ensure that our people were continuing to pray, you know, to hold ceremony wherever they were at, because what was happening around between March and April of 2020, where our communities, our tribal communities, were going on lockdown. Borders were being put up to protect our communities because we had so many knowledge keepers of all ages who know our songs, know our languages. And that's ultimately what drove us to do this work. What, you know, we kind of didn't have a choice because we knew we needed to help in the protection of our people. And so when we began to organize this, it was actually Seeding Sovereignty, who was another Indigenous-led organization, who had reached out to us and let us know and said, hey, we have some masks that we can help provide to the communities. And I know that you guys work with majority of the communities where you are from. And so if you're not too familiar with New Mexico and the indigenous populations, there's 19 different pueblos within New Mexico and 21 tribal communities in general, which include Apache and Dene nations. And so the impacts were honestly pretty alarming and pretty frightening at the beginning. And what it looked like was, you know, getting and putting out the call out for masks, putting out the ask to, you know, make sure that we were going to provide that immediate protection. You know, that was what we first thought of. And that's what initiated phase 1 of the Indigenous Impact Community Care Initiative. I see that Tyler dropped in our link to our website. And yeah, you could definitely go in there and find the campaign for this work. And that was mainly our call out in our phase one, was ensuring that we were getting all of these masks out to the communities. And we also did outreach, and we based the PPE and the needs off of what the community needed. And that's what initiated our relationship with Zoe. Believe it or not, this is the first time Zoe and I are actually even on a Zoom call together. It's just been over emails, over Facebook, but it's been bittersweet to build those connections through all of our public communities and other response teams, because we're doing it out of like our care, our traditional core values as public people. We come from communal ways of living. And it, like, again, as I said at the beginning, it's just, we kind of literally had no choice, because that's just the way that we live as a people. And those are like Indigenous values that we live with.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that leads me into thinking about what new set of needs did this create for not just your pueblos, but just Indian country in total, whenever it came to access to vital resources. And how did that look whenever you were serving your communities and organizing your focuses?
I think for our community, just the immediate need of PPE, um, you know, it was already like all other stuff were already going off the shelves, and it was hard to find masks. And so locally, I know seamstresses, people who knew how to sew, just decided to start trying out making masks and kind of testing the waters. And I know Rhea's initial reach out to our community was to send PPE to our first responders, which we were really very thankful for. Because as she mentioned, we had roadblocks in and out of the community, and no one was allowed to come through. That wasn't Zuni. And so people were being turned around and that sort of thing. There's also a major like highway that goes through our community. So people had to be turned around to go towards Gallup, towards I-40. And so I know PPE was really needed. I happened to also find another friend who hooked me up with some women from California and South Dakota and other communities. They call themselves the Auntie Sewing Squad. And so forever thankful to the Auntie Sewing Squad, many women just getting together and making masks and sending like hundreds of masks to the community. So every time we had a food distribution or care packages to deliver, we were able to provide masks to our community, especially when the COVID numbers really hit in the summer. We were able to provide care packages directly to those families who needed it, and it was a huge need. I also have a cousin who started his own fundraising page to kind of put cleaning kits together, especially last summer. Our numbers were extremely high with COVID cases. And so he also partnered with us, and he was distributing the cleaning kits, and we were kind of distributing the food kits to our community, not realizing that there was already a need prior to COVID for food, but it just drastically even became more of a need, because since our communities were closed off, tourists weren't allowed to come through, and a lot of our community members rely on tourist interaction to sell their artists' crafts. And so a lot of our artisans were hit, and unless they had an online presence, they weren't able to make money. A lot of people who were even working in because a lot of our community members work in the nearby town in Gallup, over 100 plus. And so people who were working in food industries, you know, restaurants were closing, limited hours. And so people were either laid off or working very limited hours. And so all of a sudden, all these people that normally are typically in school or working were all home, and the need just became greater, even for those who were able to, you know, make ends meet before couldn't anymore for the time being. So that was kind of our situation here in our community.
Alrighty, and so earlier it was mentioned this idea of collective community care. It's something that I believe that every or most Native Americans definitely experience, is having that uncle that comes over to grab a meal because he didn't have any extra cash, or somebody coming over to look through your clothes to borrow because they need to go to a job interview. So, Reyes, do you mind explaining what the history of collective community care in tribal communities looks like or looked like, and why this is so important or an integral piece of who we are as Indigenous people?
Yeah, thank you. Well, my immediate response to this is like historically, Indigenous people, we don't trust or we can't rely on any kind of federal or governmental assistance. You know, we have this damaged relationship because when you go back to it, you know, it has always exploited us as a people, you know, from land to resources, the list can go on. And even before these systems were created, we had always already lived in that way. You know, we lived in reciprocity with the land. We only take like what we need. Therefore, that has initiated that communal sense of care, you know, that collective living, you know, providing your people with what they need, providing your family with you know, food, with meat, you know, with you know, traditional clothing, you know, just the bare minimum things that we need. And when we the reason why it's really important to uplift this going forward is that, again, we tribal communities had to come together to create that, you know, as Zoe said, you know, her community had to create blockades and so did mine. And so I wasn't able to go back to my community for months, many, many, many months. And the only reason that I was able to go back towards like the summer fall time was because we began to harvest, we began to plant, and it was the harvest season. And what we got to see was again bittersweet because we saw a surge in all of our communities farming again, and it looks beautiful out there in the lands. And you know, that brings up food sovereignty, right? Being able to have access to those foods, and healthy foods at that. Because what also happened with the blockades and the closing the borders of our communities was that this already limited the access of our people going out to get what they need. So as Zoe said, you know, they needed cleaning supplies, they needed food baskets, and this looked different across the communities. And we, you know, we just give great gratitude to everybody who has responded in that way. Because for Hemus, as an example, what they had to do was communities, in order to make sure that we were monitoring the traffic going in and out, but also just for the safety of people, families were given a certain day to go out. You know, that was your essential day. And then that was the only day you could go out to handle all your errands, go pick up whatever it is that you need in town, handle your medical care, appointments. Some of these things were able to be handled on those other days that weren't your essential days, but you had to have like a note, you know, from your doctor or a medical slip to showcase that. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I think it's extremely important to understand how Indigenous people have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And we continue to be impacted because many of our communities still remain on lockdown and we haven't had access to the vaccinations. And just as Zoe said, pre-COVID, we already had limitations and challenges. And a lot of things arose during that time because we had to switch to distance learning, and then Wi-Fi access also became an issue, and making sure that we were transitioning all of our communities to get them the education they needed, but then also the Wi-Fi access to be able to engage virtually with their teachers. Those are just some of the things that our tribal leadership had to, come together to think about. And this is why it's also important for Indigenous peoples to really think about, and allies and accomplices, how can you support Indigenous peoples through these transitions, not just through the pandemic, but going forward as we continuously, continue to be exploited, not offered assistance in many, many ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. And just for audience's references, do you mind letting us know how far your homelands or your tribes are from the nearest town to get resources is?
I apologize. I'm at the school, so you'll hear the vacuuming in the back. Um, our nearest town is about 40 miles. But the nearest major city is like 2.5 to 3 hours.
And for Jemez Pueblo, there is a very, very small little town that's about 5 minutes off the reservation, but there's like a little small store, like a Dollar General, but that's very limited. It's very high processed foods. And so there's not anything healthy or nutritional that can really be accessed at that store. And just to kind of also give a little bit of geographical like understanding is that along where that store sits is another highway where a lot of other Navajo Nation, the Navajo Nation comes through to get into Albuquerque also. So again, like during the pandemic, those stores, everything, flew off the shelves because when you're going out on your essential days, you're going to have to stock up, right? And so this created a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people throughout rural America definitely faced, was having to almost fight with one another to be able to get toilet paper or just clean foods. But what did this look like? Because I know, Reyes, that your organization partnered with multiple pueblos throughout the state of New Mexico, but you've also participated with supporting other non-Indigenous, non-Native organizations. So what did those partnerships look like, and what did the resources for those groups look like as well?
Yeah, thank you. So again, there are a lot of other mutual aid efforts that popped up. There was Albuquerque Mutual Aid that was providing food to communities and families that were in need of weekly drop-offs of food. And they were giving to all communities, all people of color. And what was nice to see with that was that there were a lot of people who weren't of BIPOC communities coming together to support them, which was, I found very, good to see, because a lot of our people weren't able to like volunteer, because we were at home or we were stuck in our community, like people were in their communities on lockdown. And so what we did to provide support to them, because we weren't necessarily focused on food baskets at that time, we were doing more PPE. We would offer them gloves. We would offer them hand sanitizer. We would offer more masks to kind of make sure that they were staying safe and being able to follow their proper protocols that they created for themselves. And then, or the other organizations that we supported were, the trans community, LGBTQ plus, also the All Africans People's Revolutionary Party, which is based here in Albuquerque, because again, we are, people like BIPOC communities are, limited to the resources that we're able to access. And what PAA did in Seeding Sovereignty, because we had PPE, we were able to provide them with those needs. And we also shipped a lot of different PPE to many different organizations just across so-called US.
Awesome. And as Reyes had touched on, is that there were an abundance of resources that were needed, but there wasn't necessarily that supply. So, Zoe, did you ever have moments where you felt you didn't have enough for everybody? And how did you overcome this obstacle, or what solutions did you find to that?
I think from the very beginning, when I was talking about our first 25 baskets, part of doing a personal fundraiser on Facebook also means that the money is not released immediately. It takes a while. And so we needed like that money like yesterday. And so we were talking, so Zuni does have a grocery store. We have 2 grocery stores, and like in a mini mart kind of thing, like, so maybe like 2.5 grocery stores, but one major one, which is Halona Market. And we had spoke with the owner, and in talking with what could be our options of what we wanted to buy local, because we were also, we had curfew, we were not allowed to like really leave, come and go as we please. So to avoid all of that, we really were wanting to buy local. And so we talking with him and figuring out a schedule, like, because he was, even him, like his store was, I mean, he was saying how fortunate like they were still able to remain open, because a lot of like small grocery stores were closing. And so he was saying like how fortunate like that they were still able to stay open, that they were putting in orders, but they weren't getting all of their orders in, like whatever was on hand from their major place that they order from was being delivered. And so as they were trying to accommodate the community needs at the same time, they decided to work in partnership with us, and they created like a charge account at their store. So we opened an account with them. He donated his own money as well. And that's how we were able to manage the first 25 baskets through that partnership. And then we were able to eventually get our money, access to our money off of the personal fundraiser. And other donors started just, instead of sending the money directly to their tribe, they were sending it directly to the store, to our account, so that we would have a balance, and so that we could just continuously order food on a weekly basis. Because to provide like 100 baskets, it cost about between 5,000 to 7,000, depending on what we were providing in those food baskets. So we were able to do that weekly, really in like May and June. But those initial baskets were because of the community partnerships that we had established, and kind of just our own community really stepped up as well, like just donating money and support, emotional support, lunch for our volunteers, masks. I have a friend, her and her sister are both nurses, and somehow in their spare time during this pandemic, they were able to sew like 200 handmade, like, homemade masks to send to their own community. And they live in Albuquerque. And so I think it was just those reigniting like those community partnerships, and also just, I think Reyes had touched upon this about just that communal type of living, kind of really going back to our core values of Hon'iyan Kohawilawa, we'll help one another. Hon'iyan Satunawa, we'll have compassion, all of these things that we typically do for our uncles and our aunties, people that come to our house, uh, people that come to grandma's house to eat all the time, it's always an open door. And so just kind of sharing that same communal feeling with the entire community. I think just reminding one another that we can do this together if we're stronger together, as a community. It really, I think, just showed how resilient we are, and just, showing compassion to one another, and not just, through family by blood, but like just our entire community.
Of
So I
course.
think really just building those connections, I think, is and relationships, or reigniting them, is really what's really key.
Yeah. And I know whenever we look at Indian country, but also whenever we're looking at Pueblos specifically, like, I know how tight knit y'all are. I have family in Acoma and in Jemez, and, just walking into a space and immediately everybody knows everybody. You walk in and it's like, oh, hey, there's Reyes. Like, come over here. We need help in the kitchen, or, you need to go walk over there with the men to go get the evergreens for feast, or whatever that looks like. We look at this community building, and what does that look like? I don't, Reyes, if you'd like to talk on this, what is the importance of relationship building, especially whenever it comes to mutual aid work?
The relationship building is crucial and vital to any kind of collective care, any kind of mutual aid, community organizing. We have to build those authentic, trusting relationships with the people who you're going to work with, who you're going to be in community with. And again, it just comes back to like what Zoe was already mentioning with that, it comes from the innate like way of living. What my dad has always told me, I think for my relationship building, the way that I've been able to do this, especially just, me in general, the community work I do, but as a community programming director, what has always been instilled in me is like what my dad has told me is that, give when you give what you can, and, just give that, because what like that they're going to take that, and then like they're going to see. And when I say they, like our ancestors and our spirits, they're going to see like what you're doing, and you'll be blessed in good time. And not to expect anything immediately, but to know that like that reciprocity is being circulated, that you are, you just give, like, oh, like you, when like when someone passes in our community, everybody gathers and they give food, and they give food. And something that is unique about our communities is that like we don't come together to have like a funeral per se. There are traditional ways to do that, and there's not food is just automatically taken care of by the community. And
Uh-oh, I think she froze up there on us. But so let's see.
sorry, where did that cut off at?
It cut off like 15 seconds.
Where you're talking about food.
Okay. Yeah, so the food is automatically taken care of because the community is just going to provide that, because we know what the need is. So I think we really need to always make sure, if you're going to do any kind of community building, you're basing it off of what the needs are of the people. You're not just coming in and saying, oh, like I have this project, or we have like these items, like, yes, you can offer them, but, always just coming in a respectful way, recognizing whose territory you're on, or the community of people who have originally stewarded those lands or have lived there for generations. I think just being respectful and coming in that way, and not expecting anything in return. is also important when you're doing any kind of mutual aid work or community work.
Awesome. I'm like trying to like get everything and make sure that we're touching every base here. So Zoe, what ways do you think that people can get involved in mutual aid work? I know your work kind of just sparked from wanting to be able to help those children in your community, but in what ways are people in other rural communities able to do that? As Amber, as Reyes had stated, coming respectfully and also identifying areas of needs, but how can they participate and make sure that it's something that's actually impactful?
Well, I think Reyes really touched on just the importance of coming in respectfully, and that can, especially if I were to go to another community, I think I would assess like what's already being done, like what partnerships, what organizations are already doing work, where could I find a way to support, ask like what kind of needs there are. Like I think Reyes, did the way our relationship started was she sent me an email, and I don't even know how you got my email, but she sent me an email and she was like, hey, I'm from this Pueblo and we have, I'm from this organization, and, we're just reaching out to see like what you need right now in your community. Like, we know you're doing this work. How can we support you? How can we help you? We have PPE available, like we could send that to your community if it's needed. Or what are some other needs that you might have? It was just kind of like a general, like a call out. And so I really appreciated that. I think just because it was from another Pueblo, and just the way that Pueblos are kind of like looking out for each other in that manner, especially during this time. And so I was more open to that, like asking first, like what our needs were, not just saying like, we're going to send you this stuff because this is what we have, but really just asking. And I think just, it just goes those basic, humanity conversations with one another, asking what your needs are, how can you support? And not necessarily, obviously, for just an example, like my partner and I, Kelly and I could not do any of our work without our volunteers that we have. And it just happened that, we had built relationships with our community members who just kind of like would show up. And when we put the call out, they would show up, and we would just be so ever grateful for their support. And they just continued to show up. They would come every time, and I think food has a lot to do with that, but just their own initial like heart work that we were calling it, we always made sure that they were fed and that their needs were taken care of, that they had the proper gear for PPE so that they could be safe while they're delivering care packages. And I think just building that community, really relying on the importance of their hard work. And so they just have continued to come every time we put a call out, and it's been over a year, and it's people from all walks of life. Like, we were not friends. We kind of may have known each other from our communities, but it's brought us all closer, and it's a big joyful occasion when we're together delivering food or preparing care packages for our community. There's a lot of laughter, a lot of sorrow too, because we all lost family members, but just being there for one another, really just sharing that grace and of space. And I think our volunteers have really just come through and have built that support system as well. And so I think it's just really important just to build relationships above all else. Like, just taking the time to build those relationships, I think, is really key.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe. And Zoe, you had touched on the utilization of volunteers. I'm sure a lot of the work that you do is based off of that for both of you. So Reyes, do you mind touching on what that looked like whenever it came to utilizing the certain precautions that were put in place of needing to wear face masks and being able to social distance and make sure that everybody was in a safe space while they were helping you? And just kind of elaborate on what that looked like for the change throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Um, I just want to first like mention too, like the way that I was just like really amazed the way that the volunteers came together and how the Zuni community and Zoe, you know, just came together like as a people for their people and to give them what they needed. And I was just always amazed by that because organizing volunteers and ensuring everyone is safe is a lot to carry on your shoulders as you lead this work. And we were positioned to ensure that everyone was still protected. So what Pueblo Action Alliance and Seeding Sovereignty did was we created volunteer protocols. We made sure that everybody did this like check-in, like wore their masks, came in, washed their hands immediately, put some hand sanitizer on, but then also the questions of, have you traveled out of state? Have you been around anyone who had tested for COVID? Just a whole like survey of questions to make sure that we weren't bringing anyone in who may have like crossed someone who had potentially been exposed to COVID. So there were those things, and then also other things that we had to put into place was ensuring that like everybody is continuously getting tested biweekly. Because if we're going to be doing mutual aid work and we're sending out donations, we need to make sure that our team and our volunteers were not, positive for COVID. So that was one of the other things too, that we're continuously getting tested bi-weekly. And then also everybody that comes into the office, and when we leave, we're wiping everything down when we leave the office, the bathrooms, light fixtures, tables, everything that we're on or that we're utilizing that day, just to ensure that we are remaining safe in these actions. Because yes, we needed a lot of hands on deck, but we also had to come together and figure out, okay, how are we going to make sure that we're safe.
Of course, thank you so much. And so through your volunteer efforts, I had noticed that Pueblo Action Alliance had done a trash pickup. So what did that look like, again with safety precautions, but what did just a community cleanup look like due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is actually based off of community members from Jemez. What we began to see, unfortunately, were non-community members from original homelands of Indigenous peoples coming into our sacred ancestral lands, like into those mountain spaces. Yes, these are considered public lands to other people, but what was happening, you were seeing people from the Albuquerque area. And I know this was happening all over. We couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't recreate as we normally would, so people were going to the mountains. People wanted to hike, they needed fresh air. But what was happening was they were going to our ancestral homelands, going out and fishing, camping, just being out by the river, but they were trashing our spaces. It was really frustrating to see the amount of trash that was left by people who weren't living in these original lands or who were coming from Albuquerque. So it was community members of Jemez and one of our youth interns that helped with his family to begin to pick up a lot of that trash. And it just was so frustrating because you have Jemez Pueblo, right? And in order to get to the Jemez Mountains, you have to go through the community, but that's just the highway. So when you're going through the community, you're still passing all the other blockades, right? And it was hard for our own people to witness all these people coming in through the highway, being able to just recreate as they want while we were restricted and in our own communities, and then to see like our land get trashed by outsiders, people who weren't community members of like the area, come in and just really desecrate the lands in that way. And so we give great gratitude to the community members who, you know, took it upon themselves to clean up after all the other people that were leaving trash.
Awesome. Thank you. And as you mentioned, you talked about this feeling of being closed in and not being able to go anywhere. And Zoe, you had talked about your volunteer efforts of getting resources together and having people help you out along those lines. So in what ways was being able to come together and do something that was beneficial for all of your people in your community? Like you said, you shared you shared tons of laughter, but also tons of sorrow. What did those moments feel like for not only yourself, but everybody else who was there to be with you?
Yeah, I think our volunteers have dubbed themselves as the food warriors. So that's what they call themselves. And it's it's been a real joy just to see us come together as a community. I think um, you know, being on the reservation sometimes can be very what's the word? There's a lot of strengths that our community has, but sometimes we also lose our way in helping each other out sometimes. And so the pandemic really helped us focus back to our community because we weren't allowed to really go anywhere. Um, as we mentioned, we had blockades and then we had curfew and just a lot of restrictions. And so I think our community had to really come back inward and really see like how they could be of service to one another. And so our volunteers that have shown up daily, like I think for whatever reason, I know for me, they met my need of like, because I had a lot of anxiety and fear and all of these things that came about when the pandemic first hit. And it was really hard to deal with that and virtually teaching online and trying to be happy-go-lucky for all of these kids who were stuck at home and not understanding like what's going on in the world and trying to maintain some sort of normalcy for them. I was really frustrated. And so this partnering with Kelly and starting our community effort really kind of just shifted all of that fear into action, I guess, just to do something. At least I had control over organizing and helping our community. And I mean, to be honest, like a year later, like I didn't think, I'd be on a panel talking about it, first of all, or like, that our endeavor has recently made it a permanent pantry in our community. Our tribal governor and council have signed off on a resolution to have it as a permanent pantry. Obviously, we still have to raise money for our permanent pantry to exist, but that's huge for our community because yes, we get assistance from maybe commodities or like different programs, but there's always like an income based guideline. And for our pantry, it's like if you need food, all you have to do is call a number or text a number and we'll deliver or we'll provide something. And so this is just really open to everyone, not just if you meet a certain income qualification, because as I mentioned, a lot of people are still home. We're slowly, like we just recently last Friday got our curfew extended to 10 o'clock. After a year, our curfew was always till 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and then now just recently extended to 10 o'clock. So it's been a whirlwind. I think when we had our summer solstice community events, I think that's when our community really realized that a lot of our knowledge keepers got sick. Our community had over 100, people with COVID cases, and we lost a lot of people as well. And so I think dealing with that, like the grief and the stress, but being able to do positive things in our community, I think has really brought our community of volunteers together to keep pushing forward, because they feel needed. They feel like their work matters. They feel like they're fulfilling some sort of purpose in our mutual aid efforts. And so I think that just, it's there's healing in that, being together on a weekly basis, and there's, continued resilience and just pushing forward. And I think just being able to share that compassion with one another, having that space to do that, at the same token helping our community. I mean, I really feel like it's really brought us closer. And so and that's just my experience with our volunteers. Like, we could not do any of the work without them at all. So I'm really forever indebted and grateful for our volunteers.
Yeah, well, my heart goes out to you and your community with the loss of individuals, because I know whenever it comes to your community events, those are very integral pieces of everybody's everyday life. There's an event for different types of things that I personally do not know about what happens in your communities, but I know that those are very important and sacred events that you all hold, and to feel that hitting while you're trying to get back to some sort of normalcy is definitely not exactly the easiest thing to do, but it's nice to hear that you all are finding your way through that. And it's that adjustment period of trying to figure out, how do we get back to how we were prior to this pandemic? And so whenever we talk about adjusting, Reyes, do you mind talking about what that looked like for you, for your organization, but also for students within your community and throughout Pueblos in New Mexico?
So your question was, how are we adjusting to the transitions, or how are we adjusting to like the current transitions?
I think it'd be nice to touch on the initial adjustment of having to like immediately go into like this shutdown mode, but also talking about what those waves of change have looked like.
Yeah, so immediately, like, again, as I had mentioned before, it started with phase one, which was, protection of our communities with PPE, just right off the bat. Like, we need to mask everybody up, we need to make sure that everyone has not just one, but two. We held various events in the community where we did free mask giveaways for the communities. We held one here in Tiwa Territory, which is so-called Albuquerque, where we have a lot of in a large indigenous population, and then up north to reach the other communities up north, where there are a lot of other pueblos too. And so, we went where the people were at. We knew that there was limited access to PPE, and so that's what we did, like in phase one. Phase two was also ensuring that we were caring for our unsheltered relatives. Albuquerque has a large number of unsheltered relatives, and if you're hearing this term for the first time, it is a term that we're using instead of saying homeless, because we believe our indigenous people aren't homeless. They've been displaced out of their communities and displaced by systems that have not treated them in a respectful way. So a lot of the shelters shut down in Albuquerque and they didn't have access to their basic care needs. So what we did was that we teamed up with a lot of volunteers within the city, um, people with our team members from PAA and Seating Sovereignty, and we created care packages and we did that weekly. We went out into the streets and we were delivering them. And, you know, within that time, it was hard. Again, it just kind of asserted us to continue to do this work and it launched us into community defense efforts, kind of like what Zoe mentioned too. You know, what they did is a form of community defense. And community defense means, you know, coming together and creating those infrastructures, you know, taking action and really making sure that we um, acknowledge that, you know, we can take care of ourselves. You know, it's really beautiful to see that the tribal leadership created that resolution for them to have that permanent food pantry there. Like that's an act of community defense. And so it put us in this position to think beyond just mutual aid, because as we were giving care to unsheltered relatives, it felt like we were kind of just putting a band-aid on the issues that that we were witnessing and experiencing. So again, you can we also have a YouTube page if you're more interested in hearing about community defense and what that means. I can drop in that video because you can also find lots of other resources in the work that we do. But you know, we are really challenging, you know, our people to think in this way, because I think we've been positioned with this time to kind of really think about how can we provide future care for our people? How can we make sure that mutual aid isn't just a response to crisis? How can we make this ongoing? And now we're in phase 3, which is still helping to communities, reaching out. And like a couple weeks ago, we just sent more donations to Zoe, to their community, and you know, providing, still doing unsheltered care to all of our relatives out there also. But you know, we're also in this transition of, okay, so we're giving out vaccines now. I don't say we, what our tribal communities and our leadership is, but not everybody has been vaccinated. So we're kind of in this little gray area of, okay, we can't fully go back to normal just yet because not everybody's vaccinated, but also how can we still provide care? You know, while a lot of other cities and populations, like the mandates aren't there for masks anymore, but for our communities, we're nowhere near that yet. Some of the public communities are fully vaccinated, but you know, tribal leadership and community members are still having to take serious precautions to ensure that we don't have another surge within our communities, because as Zoe said, unfortunately, um, the numbers and the loss of people have been very, very high. And it hurt. It hurt to see and to witness all the loss that we experience across our communities, because as I said before, these are our the people who speak our tongue, our traditional tongue and our language. They know our songs, they know our life ways, and to have to see elders pass on who carry that traditional knowledge, or to see just any community member have to lose their life because of this pandemic has been very hard, you know. And you know, I would wake up every day just praying every single day, you know, keep me safe as I do this work, but please watch over all of our indigenous peoples, you know, not just here, but all across Turtle Island. Because what I also forgot to mention was that the community defense efforts and what like response teams had to do um, all over the globe was happening. A couple years ago, I got to travel to Brazil and I got to visit the indigenous communities out there, whom are the Guarani Kiowa peoples. they have also been violently mistreated from a very racist government, and they weren't getting what they needed also. And so Public Action Alliance sent out 5,000 masks to their communities to also help safeguard their people because they weren't getting anything. And it's just, again, it comes from that communal sense of care to know that, like, their elders were passing. PAA immediately, took that as a call to, be in solidarity with them, to showcase, that global indigenous struggle and that solidarity. So again, the transitions have been up and down, and we've had to, really base it off of the needs. That's why there's been like phase 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. I know that whenever we think of homelessness, it's not something that's necessarily existent in tribal communities, because a lot of the time, as I had mentioned before, we just tend to just find somebody's couch that's available or an extra bedroom that an auntie, uncle, grandma, grandpa has. And I know that this is something that we tend to think of as foreign, but whenever we're looking at cities, a lot of Native Americans who live in the city tend to be considered homeless. But the work that you all have been doing is definitely painting that in a different light, with making sure that it's us just taking care of our relatives. Because that's honestly all it is at the end of the day, is making sure that we're watching out for one another. Because any non-native meets, or any native meets, they're always more than happy to offer us food, shelter, whatever we may need, as long as it's something that we're open to. So I appreciate you both all for everything that you have shared with us here today. And I just wanted to go ahead and open it up to our audience to see if they had any additional questions for you all. So please feel free to either unmute yourselves or just drop a question in the chat if you have anything that you would like to ask Zoe or Reyes. I know these virtual gatherings can be a little awkward whenever it comes to trying to get things together. But I did go ahead in the chat share Zoe's Facebook link to her food pantry, as well as Public Action Alliance's page, and Seeding Sovereignty as well. So you all are more than welcome to go ahead and look at those resources, to look at the work that the 3 organizations are doing. And while we wait for questions, Zoe or Reyes, did you all have anything else that you wanted to share with us today?
I think just some of the final things I want to say is just like giving great gratitude to to folks like Zoe for being open to like receiving that care, but then also all of our team, everyone at PAA, that has come together, and, we've made it more than just mutual aid. And we're just really trying to, we're in this position where we're trying to uplift that community defense, and what that can look like across our communities. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And it looks like we did receive a comment from Suzanne Perkins. She would like to hear more about your food pantry, Zoe, and how you find funding, as well as the times that you all are open.
So we are currently trying to move into a permanent space. Space is also very limited on the res. And so we finally secured another building location, because obviously, as our state colors change, I think our McKinley County is starting to be in the turquoise color and not red anymore. And so things are slowly opening up. And I know the Zuni Wellness Center is going to want their gym back. So we are securing a space and buying equipment like refrigerators and freezers. We are currently still housed in the Zuni Wellness Center. And right now it's basically, you can call the Zuni COVID line, or there's a text number option to request food anytime. And if you request before 3 p.m. on a daily, it'll be delivered that same day. We don't do deliveries on the weekends. We were able to secure a full-time position for one of our volunteers. So super excited about that. Most of our volunteers, like I teach during the day, and so everybody else, you know, has their own other first job, and this is just kind of their passion work that they do on the side. And so we're just fortunate to be able to secure a full-time position for one of our volunteers. And we are accepting any donations to the Pueblo of Zuni. Any donations can be sent to the Pueblo of Zuni. If you send like a check, just putting Zuni Mobile Pantry, attention Zuni Mobile Pantry, then it'll get sent to our permanent pantry. Hopefully Susanna answered some questions. So we're typically open from about 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, depending on the day. Our worker is our worker bee. she was able to meet Aaron from Seed Sovereignty, which we made a connection through Reyes recently, and Aaron drove all the way to Zuni to deliver her donations. And so our person was able to meet with her. And so depending on what's being delivered, because we still work also in partnership with the Gallup Community Pantry, they give us food boxes about once a month, about close to 300 food boxes. So then we have a public distribution. So she organizes, our worker organizes that. We actually also have a truck, so she's able to go and load it up and herself and not have to wait for them to deliver, because they're also limited in their delivery as well. So again, just building partnerships continuously and helping out when we can.
Awesome. And again, thank you both. Was there anything that you wanted to leave everybody with, or any lasting impressions, maybe some action items on how they can be supporters of other mutual aids in their areas, or even start their own?
I just would like to maybe reiterate that, you know, when you're coming together to do any kind of mutual aid work or community organizing, you know, just to always make sure that you're coming in a respectful way, you know, acknowledging the land that you are on, whose territories you're on, indigenous territories, but also, you know, making sure that you're actually meeting the needs of the people. You know, is this project or is this, you know, community effort really going to benefit the people of that community, you know, and that you are just, you know, coming in a good way. And as I said before, you know, not expecting anything in return, because if you're doing community work, you know, it's about more than the individual. You know, it can't come from any kind of individualistic thinking. It should always come from that communal sense of, you know, uplifting the people who need it most. And that's definitely what PAA bases our work off of, you know, those traditional core values. And that's what, you know, we have been gifted, and we don't acknowledge this work and what we do as like activism. You know, we know that this is our life work, and that we're here to carry out this, you know, for cultural sustainability, for our people to, you know, live and thrive. So that's just kind of what I would like to leave you all with, and thank you.
I would just like to add, I think in also doing community work, you also have to make sure that you make time for yourself. Sometimes, you know, getting really excited and pushing forward and really wanting to meet the needs of our community, it takes a lot of hard work. And so a lot of stress sometimes and time management, time away from your family. So just making sure that you carve out time for yourself. Because you could easily burn out doing this work, and then it becomes something else, and then you're not going to want to do it. And so I think to sustain relationships and sustain your passion in doing it, and I think just being honest with yourself. I think Kelly and I, we were just two moms that just wanted to help our community, and way at the beginning we both had a conversation and said, anytime that we feel like enough is enough, like we're okay to just walk away. I mean, obviously it's a lot harder to do, but like we had this conversation, like we're okay to just say we did our part, and this is it. And obviously we haven't had that conversation. But we were able to help each other out. I took a week off, because for a while there, the momentum was like every single day on top of our daily job. This was like my second job, I felt like. And so, at some point we both just kind of had to say, like, I'm going to take a step back. I need some time for myself. And so she was able to be present and be there with our volunteers. And then whenever she needed to take a step back, I was able to be there. So it was really helpful to have another partner. And then at one point, I think both of us just needed that time out, and we could really rely on our volunteers because they would just show up consistently. And so they would just run it. And so it was just amazing to see that, we could have those that community of volunteers to just really, own it, own their presence in the work that they were doing. And so I think just also recognizing to take care of yourself, to take care of your heart, because it's a lot, it's a lot that we sustain and endure it during this pandemic. So, and we continue to as well. But yeah, just carve out time for yourself too.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate both of you for joining us today, and I appreciate everybody who sat in here and listened to the conversation and the important messages that Reyes and Zoe had to share with us, as well as participating in Rural Assembly everywhere. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening or afternoon, depending on where you're at. And we hope to see you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Reyes is so happy to meet you.
I know. Finally.